Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's been great to see so much interest in the session, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm Caroline White. I'm Deputy Editor of Boat International, and I'm delighted to be hosting part 3 of our online Charter Insights series. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Today's session will be recorded and will be available next week on demand, so don't worry if you have to leave early. Meanwhile, if you'd like to talk about the event on social media, please use the hashtag Charter Insights. We'll have time for questions towards the end of the session, so please do submit them throughout the conversation. At the bottom of your screen is a chat button, so simply click on that and submit a question. The team behind the scenes will pass these on to me, and we will do our best to get to as many of those as we can at the end of the session, but please don't be shy. Finally, if you're having trouble viewing the live stream, please also message on the chat button, and again, the team behind the scenes will do their best to help. Before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to provide a little background on today's session. In previous instalments of our Charter Insight series, we've heard from brokers and captains about the summer season and the upcoming Caribbean season in terms of charter. In both cases, COVID has loomed large. It's the one factor that places a pall of uncertainty over charter in the next months and perhaps even in the coming years. But because it's a fresh problem still, and it comes with developing science and laws attached, it's still frustratingly difficult to make any definite predictions about it. That doesn't mean, however, there's no use considering it. Learning about how others are dealing with the pandemic could offer valuable lessons that we can all take into our work. It may even be that as charter clients change their behaviour, new opportunities open up. At the very least, we might improve our ability to react as new chapters in this saga unfold. And because we've spoken to quite a few charter brokers so far in the series, we thought we'd go a little off-piste with our panellists this time. To this end, I'm delighted to welcome our panel of speakers. We've got Ben Lyons, who's CEO of EOS Expeditions, Colin Richardson, who is captain of Mirage, which is for charter with Superyacht Sales and Charter. And we have Tony Brown, who is Marina Director of Porto Montenegro. To start off with, I think I'm going to turn to Tony. Tony, can you tell me how the summer season has been at Porto Montenegro?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here representing Porto Montenegro. The summer season, it's been different. Unusual, I think, as everybody has experienced in 2020. It's not something any of us anticipated. I think in terms of a more direct response to your question with regards to charter and marina activity, I guess a little bit of background. Porto Montenegro had a pretty easy time with the initial run of COVID-19. We didn't really have any sort of full lockdown. There was some curfews put in place, losing my words there, some curfews put in place, but most of the shops were still open. We were still able to freely move around the country. As we came into the summer period, Montenegro was the first country in Europe to eliminate COVID-19, which was a pretty good thing. We negotiated in terms of the marina with the government of Montenegro to implement a quarantine zone within the marina. So whilst we had eliminated COVID-19 in Montenegro, we wanted to ensure that any visiting yachts that came into Montenegro would not be putting all the good efforts that the government and the epidemiologists had put in place at risk. So we did see quite a few yachts come in very early on as people started to move again, as yachts started to move again. Then the quarantining requirement, which was 2 weeks in Montenegro, was completely lifted by the government, and there was free movement up and down the Adriatic between Montenegro and Croatia. And we saw a big influx of yachts, which was great. It looked like we were going to have a pretty buoyant season to start with. I know that Croatia still has a pretty buoyant season. Unfortunately, Montenegro being a very small country with a small population, the levels, as the borders opened, the levels and numbers of cases within Montenegro rose. With a small population, we were suddenly put into the red zone, which meant that people leaving Montenegro had to undertake certain measures when they went into a European country. That's slowed the charter business down slightly. Having said that, we do have quite a few home-based yachts. What we've seen, those people that are here are actually coming in where they'd normally go away on charter. They're actually coming into Montenegro, jumping on board the yacht and enjoying what Montenegro has to offer for a week or so of charter or owner usage, as the case may be. We're seeing that people getting on the yachts are really enjoying spectacular scenery, anchorages and backdrops, and not stepping ashore as much for a shoreside experience as traditionally you would anticipate, and what we're seeing. We're now focusing more, I think, on the upcoming winter. We've got a tremendous amount of inquiries for winter berthing, which is a good thing to have, a good uptake there. It looks to us like, will we see a Caribbean charter season? And maybe we can come back to that a little bit later in the session. But by the number of inquiries that we're seeing, we think that maybe the med-based boats will stay over this side.
Interesting. Okay. And just returning to what you've sort of put in place within the marina to keep people safe, can you tell us about some of the measures that you've introduced?
Yeah, well, that's been a mixed bag in terms of perception from both crew and owners. So some boats are very strict about protocols. Others feel like they just want it all to go away and forget that this pandemic has ever happened. For us, though, we're taking it very seriously, where we've always tried to listen to what our customers need, what they want, and react on that feedback. Obviously, we've instilled all of the government requirements, but we've also instigated what we call the Safe Haven program. So, as an example, all our crew are regularly tested, our staff are regularly tested. We have the quarantine area that I talked about. We have sanitisation processes in place where doorknobs, rails, that sort of thing, are regularly cleaned by our housekeeping staff. We've got an agreement with the fire brigade where they come through and they do a big wash down of the public spaces on a regular basis. The agents and provisioners that we work with, they've jumped on board with us in terms of the delivery of goods to yachts. So we have a large vessel that's leaving this morning. I was down there when the provisioners came. They're literally putting boxes on the dock and the crew are sanitising everything as the provisions are going onto that yacht. We've got areas in the hotel where arriving crew, if there's a rotational situation going on, can come in and self-isolate in a hotel room for a week, 2 weeks, whatever the yacht's requirement may be. So we've taken it really quite seriously, not making it obtrusive, but really meeting the requests and demands of the customers.
Okay. And in terms of, so you mentioned there a bit about the kind of people who are coming to the marina at the moment. Do you think that Eastern European destinations such as Croatia or Montenegro have seen charterers who might ordinarily have visited more classic med destinations going further east to kind of get away from more crowded cruising areas? Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, I think Colin and Ben will probably have a pretty good insight into this as well. But I guess going back to what I mentioned previously, where we're seeing people coming in and just enjoying the yacht and sitting in a beautiful location. The Adriatic is a phenomenally, naturally spectacular location. Working your way up and down the islands, Montenegro as a backdrop and then going up through Croatia, working your way up and down this coast is something that you can do without really needing to get off the yacht. So in terms of a more remote location, perhaps, but I think that's largely driven by a safety consideration and still enjoying yourself on the yacht without feeling too remote and having something pretty spectacular to look at. So yes, I think people are moving away from those more densely populated traditional locations to something that's a bit more off the beaten track, perhaps.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'd like to turn to Ben. So if anybody doesn't know about EOS, they are the adventure specialists who advise super yachts that if you want to go to Antarctica or somewhere crazy, you talk to these guys. So on that note, could you tell us whether you think owners will be going further afield, even to meet even more adventurous places to reduce their contact with others? And if so, what kind of destinations they might be heading to?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Caroline. And I think one of the great things about the expeditions and the trips that we run is that we go to places where there isn't infrastructure. And so if there isn't infrastructure, if there isn't crowds and people, correspondingly, there isn't COVID. And so that's very appealing right now because everybody still has the desire to travel. The COVID hasn't turned that desire down, but it's about selectively choosing where you want to go and where you're going to feel the safest. So people are definitely having an interest in going to these remote regions. And what it's coming down to from our side is really the travel regulations, the restrictions that are in place. In a typical summer, we would be taking clients to Alaska, to the Canadian Arctic, to Greenland, to Iceland, Svalbard, and Norway. And where we found that the greatest success this summer was in areas that had very clear regulations in terms of what travel was allowed, and places that generally had the COVID situation under control, much like Tony was saying in Montenegro. So, for instance, Alaska was a very choice destination. There was a lot of interest in Alaska for clients this summer because for American citizens, there was no repatriation issues. They knew if they got sick, they would be able to get off the yacht. They'd be able to get medical care. They wouldn't be prohibited from landing. And the same thing was true with Iceland. Iceland had very clear protocols. They had a very strong testing procedure in place right from the beginning. And so as they had their plan to open up the country, yachts could make plans and could, know that they could safely head to Iceland. So that for us has been the biggest thing is knowing in advance where these yachts could go and what the travel regulations would be. Others were very clear. The Canadian Arctic, for instance, I think probably back in May, just said absolutely no vessels of any kind for the entire summer. And there was no ambiguity about it. So you could just take that right off the planning schedule. So it's remote destinations, it's areas where you can be on the yacht, and all of the main attractions are things that can easily be achieved with the crew and the expedition team, and areas that are very clear, have COVID under control with clear protocols and testing procedures.
Interesting, okay. And then Colin, turning to you and slightly more traditional cruising destinations, I understand that Mirage has been in the Med this season. Could you tell us if you think she'll go back to the US for the Caribbean season and whether you think many other yachts will?
I think it depends on where the owners of the yachts are based. If they're US-based owners, then going to the Caribbean is fairly straightforward. The weather's generally a lot nicer there in the winter. So I think that's a pretty good bet. The owners of Mirage, for example, are based in Europe. So for them to go to the Caribbean this year doesn't make as much sense unless they wanted to go there for some specific event. For us as a charter yacht, we try and run it as a business where we can. Obviously, we don't run it as a complete business. So for us to go to the Caribbean, if the owners decided not to use the boat, would probably not make financial sense. And we did have a little bit of maintenance planned this winter. So we're not going to go to the Caribbean. And I think a lot of the yachts will go to wherever the owners are based, whether they're Asian, the yachts are in Asia, they might stay there. US-based yachts might stay in the US, maybe go down to the Caribbean. Same with Pacific-based yachts and European yachts. I think to a certain extent we'll stay in Europe this summer.
Okay. And in the Med this summer, have you experienced, or in Europe this summer, have you experienced much difficulty moving between destinations, and have your clients had any trouble getting to you?
Yeah, so like anyone else, it's been a pretty tough year for us. Back in January, we had 9 weeks of charter booked, signed for, and it all started with the Cannes Film Festival, which was cancelled. Then all our charters in June were cancelled because we were coming out of the back of a extensive paint job. The entire boat was repainted. So we couldn't get that finished in time. We only managed to get out of Mallorca in June. And we had charters cancelled up until July. Fortunately, picked up again for us in July. And Mirage is currently in Sardinia, doing its 3rd week of charter. And we have another week to go, and our owners are on board later on in August. After that, it's pretty tough. We've had US clients specifically who are unable to travel to Europe, who have cancelled. So right now, September has pretty bleak month for us and most of my peers. It's difficult. I think most of the charter clients are coming, and as Tony said, they're not really coming to embrace a culture or a country or a cuisine. They're coming to get on a yacht wherever they can. If they can fly privately, specifically privately, and they're allowed to land and they're allowed to embark, I don't think this year is a place where they're going to take in any historical and cultural expertise. It's literally, let's get on a yacht. The wealthy still want to have a holiday, and they're in a position to do so. They're going to come to a yacht that is in a country they're allowed to get to, they're allowed to get on board, and they're allowed to go home from without any potential travel bans at the end of their trip.
Okay, so based on that, talking about getting to and from the boat being such an important factor at the moment, Ben, do you think that there might be more of a synergy between the private jet sector and the super yacht sector in future?
Absolutely. It's a natural synergy. Of course, they're the same clientele, same demographics. And, what we're looking at the moment is our Antarctica season, which will be starting in December. And the challenge there is not, keeping people safe on the yacht, because that's a controlled environment. It's a closed environment. We can do testing. We can be sure that the experience on the yacht is as safe as possible. The challenge is getting people to these destinations. We're going to have to fly them from Europe to South America and then down to Antarctica. And so a key component of that sort of safe bubble or corridor that we're looking to create for all of our clients is going to be the private jet experience. It just allows you to have an element of control, an additional level of safety. You're taking unknown factors out of it. So we're actively collaborating already ourselves with a couple different private jet companies. And to me, it's a natural fit and for the yachting industry to go down this way.
Okay. And then turning back to you, Colin, once people are actually on the yacht, could you tell us what kind of measures Mirage will be taking to keep those charterers safe?
Yeah, so we want the charterers to enjoy themselves as much as possible, but also stay safe and keep the crew safe. So prior to embarkation, we have asked all our charter clients to responsibly self-isolate themselves before they come over. We've also asked them whether they want the crew to wear masks or whether the guests want to wear masks. What sort of environment do they want to have? And in every case, the protocols have been fairly strict at first. Yes, we're gonna do everything by the book. We want the crew to wear masks, but literally within a few minutes of them being on board or even en route from the airport to the yacht, the messages come through, please don't wear any masks. Nobody's going to shake hands with the guests, which quite often happens. Instead, there might be certainly some fist pumps and elbow pumps with repeat clients. For new clients, it's been a little bit more formal. But at the moment, we don't wear any masks purely because our charter clients have not wanted us to, and they haven't been wearing any masks. And I do think if people are worried to that level of uncertainty, then it's probably unlikely they'd even get on the plane in the first place. These are people who are fed up like the rest of us, just want to have a holiday, can afford to have a holiday, and I think wearing a mask would be counterproductive. If, however, one of the guests or one of our crew displays symptoms of COVID, we purchased 75 kits on board, of which we have used a couple. Fortunately, we haven't had any COVID positive results. And what we would do in the event of that is to seek professional medical help. If somebody did show up as positive on one of our test kits, obviously, if it's one of the crew, we'll send them home or put them in rented accommodation or whatever we need to do, and discuss it with the client. It hasn't happened before. We're excuse the pun, but we are in uncharted waters here. So. For us, we want our clients to have a great time. We want them to stay safe. So we'll sort of make it up as we go along, really. And in terms of clients becoming ill, the same thing. We'd seek professional medical help, take them to a clinic, and discuss what to do with the charterer. after that. We have 10 crew on rotation, and I'm going back next week with one of the head chefs, for example, and we're going to self-isolate in a hotel in Porto Cervo for 2 days before embarking the boat. And I have my own cabin. The head chef will stay in a guest cabin for 2 days, and we'll take a test after that before the owners come on board. So we have that protocol with crew, and that's something we can enforce. We'll wear a mask in the crew areas and certainly have our own dinner time. But in terms of the guests coming, we'll kind of do whatever they want to do as long as it's safe and makes them happy.
Okay. And then, Ben, from your point of view, what would you do if you were in a similar position? If somebody fell ill on a charter you were involved with and you were in a remote destination, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, of course, all the procedures that would be done on board, much like Colin's talking, is the same whether you're in Montenegro or whether you're in Antarctica. For us, the challenge is ensuring that you can get the guests to medical care and ensure the safety of everybody on board, crew and guests that are still on the yacht. So what we don't want to have is a situation that was repeated throughout the news in March, which all these cruise ships stranded, where crew couldn't get off the ship or infected passengers couldn't get off the ship. That's just something that we couldn't possibly have on a charter with a yacht. So there's two ways to sort of combat that. And the first is to selectively choose your destination. And again, this is what I'm talking about with Alaska being good for US citizens. If somebody falls ill in Alaska, yes, we're in a remote area, but we can still get them to medical help, and we can repatriate them without any issues. Or, Northern Europeans sort of traveling to Norway or Svalbard, something like along those lines. For the more international destinations, something like Antarctica, there we really have to work in close communication and cooperation with local authorities. We are part of the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators, and we're leveraging that whole organization to really develop protocols and procedures with Chile, with Argentina, and with the Falkland Islands. So what do we do if somebody does fall ill, and to ensure that the governments and the local authorities in all of these places are receptive to being to having a sick person. I was on the phone yesterday with some of the port agents in Ushuaia, Argentina, and we were going through those exact procedures. What are the local authorities feeling about it? And their general feeling is that for smaller vessels like the yachts, they have the infrastructure. Once you can get them to these cities, that they have the infrastructure to deal with a yacht as opposed to a large cruise ship. So there's awareness that the situation is different with these small vessels.
Okay, that's really interesting. And Tony, similar question for you. How would you deal with a case on board a yacht that was in Porto Montenegro?
I think we would work very closely with the yacht, of course. We, as I mentioned before, have a quarantine area, so we have the ability to put the vessel into the quarantine zone. But as Ben said, what's very important is to not end up with a scenario where it feels a bit like a plague ship. The airport here in Montenegro is open. They have very good facilities, medical facilities in Montenegro to deal with this as well, if that was required. Most of the cases that we've seen here, and I'm no expert, but they've all been very mild. So whether the person stays on board the yacht in a isolation on board the yacht, goes into a hotel where we have rooms available for quarantining in the hotel, or has a private jet to fly out of the country, is all available options. So yeah, we would just work really closely with the yacht to make sure that they have what they need, and work with the medical practitioners and facilities here in Montenegro. Okay,
and then actually, Tony, I was going to ask you another question, which was, I know that Porto Montenegro, as you mentioned there briefly, has some quite a number of on-land facilities as well as the marina, including a hotel. And I know that there are a number of very high-end resorts in the area that you're in. Have you heard anything from them or within Porto Montenegro itself about the idea of people who might ordinarily have booked to stay in a hotel instead choosing to charter? Is that something you've heard anything about? Not
so much with us. I think we're seeing the sort of same level of boat usage that we would expect based on the occupancy that we have in the marina. I haven't seen a huge uptake in usage on board the yachts that we would otherwise expect to be in the hotels. I think everywhere in the hotel business is seeing a downturn in business. Are those people using yachts? It's a very good question. I can't, maybe Ben's got an insight into that more so than I have. I think maybe in the future we might start seeing that. The yacht is a very, I guess, safe, optically safe place to be. So yeah, maybe Ben has an insight into that one.
Yeah, Ben, do you have an insight? I mean, the idea that as a positive situation that we could see perhaps charter clients coming from hotels and instead chartering yachts, is that something you think might happen?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think a lot of the clients that we see on our expeditions are outside the traditional yachting circles anyway. They are people who want to explore an area that is otherwise inaccessible, but on their own terms. And that is certainly what a yacht allows them to do. And so within expedition travel, within remote travel in general, yes, we are seeing people who are outside the yachting sector wanting to try something different. And I think the yachting industry can actually utilize sort of the COVID situation to attract a whole nother set of people, because yachts are seen, whether it's in Montenegro or in Antarctica, as this incredibly safe haven. It is a bubble from the rest of the world. And the people that would ordinarily not have considered a yacht and considered a hotel, I think probably will be looking at this now, because the idea to have nobody else but your own family, your own friends surrounding you is incredibly appealing. So this is absolutely an opportunity to reach a new demographics with this situation. Okay,
well, thank you very much. We've got a few questions from our audience. So Colin, I'm going to address one to you. Do you think that clients will start booking longer charters, either to make up for lost time or because moving around is now more difficult?
Yeah, I think they will. We've seen it this year as well on Mirage. We've had two-week charters, which typically we'll do a week, maybe 10 days. 2 weeks is not unusual, but it's not that common. Our clients that were going to come this year, we've reached a deal with most of them whereby they're going to come next year. So we've shifted 4 clients already over to 2021. So in terms of longer periods of time, I think providing guests are not governed by school holidays and weddings, the more wealth people generate, the more busy they become. So for them to find 10 days is quite often challenging. 2 weeks is really challenging, and providing they can work from on board and have access to the internet, then I think we'll definitely see longer charter periods. But most of our clients are not old enough to worry about, are not young enough, to worry about, to have a problem where they have school holidays. Their kids have got weddings, they've got bat mitzvahs. There's a host of things going on in their private life that they just can't take 2 weeks off. Some can, but I think it's certainly going to be an incentive to have less travel. Private jet travel is convenient. It's more expensive than commercial, obviously. Mm-hmm. So I think 10 days is going to become the new normal. Maybe not more than that, but certainly a week. I think we might start seeing more than a week, probably 10 days, in my opinion.
Okay, and
I would just add to that we definitely saw that this summer, that the trips we were running were much longer than normal. Nobody was coming for a week. One client was even going for 5 weeks. So I think, it's once you get there, once you make all the effort, once you tackle the travel protocols, it just makes sense to stay longer.
Well, Ben, a question for you. What can hosts or yachts do to prevent taking COVID to remoter destinations if you're going to somewhere really far-flung and remote? What are yachts doing to prevent that?
I mean, I think it's no different whether it's remote destinations or Montenegro. You need to have the same protocols in place, which is simply testing. It has to be, I think it boils down to nothing more than testing. Testing with 100% crew, 100% of the guests, and retesting as well. It's not necessarily good enough to start at the start of the season and say, yes, we've tested everybody on the crew and everybody's fine for the rest of the year. I think you have to continually be verifying that the ship is free. And you can look at the cruise industry as the example, because they've tried to start up some operations in the last 2 to 3 weeks. And even with relatively strict procedures, COVID has managed to find their way on board these ships. And we're not talking about the ships with 2,000 passengers. I'm talking about ships with 100 passengers. So whether it's a remote destination or not remote destination, you just have to be able to continually test and verify that it's a safe environment.
And actually on that note, do you think, so with the testing, how does that work? If you're on a yacht and you need to do repeated testing, do you need to send the tests off somewhere and get them back? How exactly would that work?
I think there's different systems. I mean, we know of systems where you can use saliva and send that back and get a response within 48 hours. Actually gets sent back to New York City and tested. There's also rapid test kits that you can have on board, much like Colin was talking about. We heard a quote yesterday for a rapid testing kit that was an $80,000 system. But then you also have systems that are, as Colin was saying earlier, much more accessible. And indeed, as the industry is sort of ramping up in terms of testing, these prices are coming down. The accessibility of these kits and are also becoming a lot more widespread.
Yeah. So actually, Colin, I think we were. It was before we were on air that you were telling us about that. Could you just tell us about the tests that you guys have on board?
Yeah. So they're self-test kits, and you have a pinprick. You put a little bit of blood on a test piece of plastic, and within that test piece of plastic there is a line that sort of goes up the tissue, and it tells you whether you have had COVID, so whether it says it has any antibodies or whether you currently have it. So it's a pretty nice kit. They're the IgM rapid test kits made in the States, and so far so good. We haven't had anybody test positive for COVID. We haven't seen anybody with antibodies either, but they're the ones we have. We've used about 15 of them, and we've told all our clients whenever they come on board, would you like us to test the crew? And they've all said no. And would anybody like a COVID test? And they've all said no. The 15 we've used ourselves. I've tried them, and we haven't had anybody who's been symptomatic to COVID, so we haven't wasted them. Certainly towards the end of the season, I'll start using them a little bit more, so that we don't end up with them in the shipyard. And as Ben has stated, it's test. We'd like to use them, and I think, as he was saying, they are becoming more prevalent, they're becoming more accurate, and they're becoming more inexpensive. So as soon as we use these ones up, we'll get some more. It's all about testing.
Okay. On another note, so Ben, I have a question for you. Do you think that we could start seeing charterers who want to use an Explorer yacht in well-trodden destinations such as the Med, just so that they don't have to go into port?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I think you already see that to a certain extent. It's one of the great things on an Explorer yacht or an expedition yacht, whether it's the Sea Explorers or La Dacia or Planet 9, Cloudbreak. These are yachts that can go anywhere in the world, but are also offer an incredible experience in the Mediterranean. I mean, I've had clients take Cloudbreak in Antarctica and also take her in the Mediterranean. And absolutely, I don't think you have to sort of limit yourself to just the remote destinations when you have an expedition yacht.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a question for either Tony or Colin, depending on which one of you feels like answering it. In terms of charter bookings, what percentage do you think you've gone down this year? I realise it's a slightly different scenario for both of you. And do you think clients are booking further in advance? So I think for Colin, that's really a question of your kind of the numbers of bookings you've had. And for Tony, I think that's really a question about the kind of interest that you're seeing. So,
well, yeah, we're 60% down on our typical charter revenue. that's not. It's really got nothing else to do with except for COVID. Most of our clients are American; they can't travel to Europe, so that's really meant us taking a pretty big hit. With regards to 2021 bookings, as I said previously, 4 of our clients, so 4 different weeks of charter, have shifted to 2021, and we're in the process of a 5th client who is supposed to come in September, who would like to shift to August next year. It does help when we have owners who are extremely organized and very professional with their time. So we have a calendar which is generally planned a year in advance, where they have key dates that they would like to use the yacht, and the rest of the time we're able to go out and try and book it for charter, and if there's any clashes we'll talk about it. So it helps to have a good plan for a yacht. And most of my peers have owners who don't know what they want to do and don't have a plan, and therefore you can't plan to book any charters in 2021. So fortunately we have owners who realize that, you know, if they can plan properly, so can we.
Okay. And Tony, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can look at it statistically from the number of vessel movements that we're seeing in and around the region. So our marina occupancy in the long term is actually pretty static and even slightly higher than what we would normally anticipate at this time of the year, because the boats that we do have in the marina and had over the winter period have predominantly stayed here. Whereas in the transient activity, people would have a winter here and then move on, and we'd collect new customers for the following winter. What we have seen, though, is a huge downturn in the number of transient yachts during the summer period. Our super yacht dock, we have 31 berths between 50 and 130 metres. At this time of year, that's usually packed. So is the anchorage, with yachts waiting to come into the dock when there's an available slot. So it's this year massively down. We usually have between 120 to 150 movements, boats coming in and out of the marina every day during the summer. This year we're down to about 30 to 40.
Okay.
So that's the only reflection I can give as an answer to that question, which is, yeah.
Yeah, that's very enlightening. Thank you. Okay, well, I think that's about it for today. We're kind of out of time. So thank you very much to all of you. It's been fascinating to hear your insights, and let's hope that we can continue to tackle it effectively and that things are going to get better next year. And thanks everyone for joining us. I hope that it's helped to answer some of your questions. A huge thank you to Colin, Ben and Tony for joining us and sharing such valuable insights. All on-demand videos from the previous webinars are available on our website, and this one will be available next week, I think. I also have some important news. At Boat International, we've rolled 3 of our big events into one. Life Under Sail, the Explore Yacht Summit, and the World Super Yacht Awards will now run together as the Festival of Yachting, and that's going to take place in Monaco from the 11th to the 13th of November. Again, for more details, please see our website.